Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to World Economy. My name is Blyden Kim. On World Economy today, mortgage rates in the U.S. continue to rise, and we begin from there. The average U.S. 30-year fixed mortgage rate jumped by 10 basis points to 6.56% last week, its highest level in 7 weeks, and tracking Treasury yields. As a result, mortgage application declined 2.3%, with application to purchase a home slumping 4.1%, and those to refinance a home loan aging down 0.1%. And now to the oil sector as oil prices fall for second day. WTI crude futures fell for a second straight session to around $102 per barrel today, as traders grow cautiously optimistic that the U.S. and Iran could eventually reach an agreement, despite conflicting signals from both sides. U.S. President Trump said the conflict with Iran could end very quickly, while also warning that Washington could resume strikes in the coming days if negotiations fail. Trump added that he had recently called off a planned U.S. attack scheduled for Tuesday as part of efforts to advance a potential deal. Iran threatened to extend the conflicts beyond the region if the U.S. and Israel resume attacks. Meanwhile, disruption in the Strait of Hormuz continued to support oil prices, and although some vessels have resumed transit, the key shipping routes remain largely restricted. Reports indicated that 3 supertankers carrying crude departed at the Strait of Hormuz on Wednesday. Oil prices remain roughly 50% above levels seen before the conflict began. And now let's look at the price of commodities in the market, the commodity markets this morning. Commodity market begins with a price of crude oil, crude prices, that is U.S. crude, price level standing at $101 per barrel, falling and by 3 points, a negative 2.95% decline. Brent, which represents Nigeria's price benchmark, price level stands at $107 per barrel, a downward 3.394 points, a negative 3.05%. A gasoline price also downward, natural oil price, natural gas price downward, heating oil downward, negative 3.37%, while gold price from a metal point of view, the price level stands at $4,502 per ounce, gaining 13 points, a 0.3% appreciation. Let's look at further markets in this one. Looking at the commodities, after talking about the price of gold, or silver price at $75 per ounce, gaining 1.971 point, a 2.68% appreciation, and copper price at price level of 6.2 dropping, gaining 0.67%. Soybeans at a negative 0.51% decline, wheat price at $664 per bushel, dropping 2 points, a negative 0.39%. Coal price also falling, steel price falling, and TTF gas falling. On the perspective of world economy, we move to Africa as Bank of Mauritius raises key rate to 4.75%. The Central Bank of Mauritius raised its key repo rate by 25 basis points to 4.75% during its May 2026 meeting, pushing borrowing costs to the highest level since 2013, citing economic uncertainty. Headline inflation accelerated to 3.6% in April 2026 from 2.7%, although still within the 2 to 5% target range. Inflation is expected to climb above 5% if the Middle East conflict persists, amid fuel price hikes, which threatened the central bank's focus of 3.6% average per year end. Domestic economic activity has remained resilient despite slowing to 2.7% in the final quarter of 2025. Growth is nevertheless expected to moderate in 2026. Assuming the conflict is resolved by mid-2026, real GDP growth is projected to ease to 2.8%, down from the previous forecast of 3.3%. Governor Tako has stated that future policy decisions will remain prudent, guided by inflation trends, the growth outlook, and broader economic developments. Still within Africa, South African rand firms up and firm on rate hike baits. The South African rand edged up to around 16.6 per dollar after the latest inflation data raised expectation of a potential rate hike by the South African Reserve Bank. South Africa's inflation rate climbed to an over a 1.5-year high of 4% in April from 3.1% in March, surpassing the consensus of 3.9% and reaching the upper limit of the central bank's 3, a plus minus 1% target range. The simultaneous rise in core inflation suggested broader price pressures building in the economy, driven by the agency energy shock associated with the Iran conflict. Many economists anticipate at least a 25 basis point rate hike at the next South African Reserve Bank's policy meeting later this month. Governor Lesetja Jantjoga recently signaled that the central bank will respond to any persistent inflationary pressures stemming from the Middle East conflict, while reiterating its strong commitment to the 3% targets. So in the context of South Africa, he also pointed to the importance of timely central bank intervention in preventing second-round effects and controlling inflation. Analysts look at a US dollar against African currencies, just as we spoke about the South African rand, the US dollar against African currencies, and afterwards we'll look at the FX markets and crypto market, the US dollar against African currencies. First, we start from a point of view of the Naira. A US dollar against the Nigerian Naira price level stands at 1,372 Naira, equaling $1 upward pedestal for the dollar, but just slightly, no significant change in terms of volatility of this particular market. And next, the US dollar against the South African rand price level standing at 16.59 rand, equaling $1. The dollar falling a negative 0.59% decline against the South African rand. Similarly, the US dollar against Zambian kwacha, a price level stands at 18.9 Zambian kwacha to $1. The dollar gaining 0.53% over the kwacha. And the US dollar against the Egyptian pound at 53 Egyptian pound, 53.3 Egyptian pound to $1. The dollar gaining 0.55% over the Egyptian pound. And now let's look at the FX market. What the general majors are saying. First, we start with the US dollar against the Swiss franc. The US dollar against the Swiss franc, 0.79 franc, equaling $1. The dollar gaining 0.18% over the Swiss franc, and the dollar against the Canadian dollar at 1.37 Canadian dollar to $1. The dollar gaining 0.11% over the Canadian dollar. The US dollar against the Mexican peso, 17 peso, equaling $1. The dollar struggling, a negative 0.2% decline for the dollar against the Mexican peso, and the US dollar against the Indian rupee. The rupee at 96 rupee to $1. The dollar struggling, negative 0.38% decline against the Indian rupee. The US dollar against the Brazilian real, 5.02 real, equaling $1, a negative 0.6% decline for the dollar against the real. And the US dollar against the Russian ruble. The Russian ruble, 71 ruble, equaling $1. The dollar also declining slightly against the ruble. And the US dollar against the South Korean won, 1,504 won, equaling $1. The dollar struggling slightly. Volatility level of this market isn't so much, but a negative 0.21% decline for the dollar against the won. Let's look at the US dollar even further, the FX market even further, as we look at the majors against the majors for the FX market. And now to the Euro USD market, 1.15, which is a US dollar 15 cents, equaling €1. The euro struggling slightly, well, not much of a significant change, a negative 0.06% decline for the euro against the US dollar, and the pound against the US dollar at $1.34, equaling £1 at 0.04% advantage for the pound. Well, the Aussie against the US dollar, Australian dollar at 0.71 or 71 cents, equaling $1 Australian, a 0.3% appreciation for the Australian dollar. The New Zealand dollar doing well compared to the US dollar, gaining 0.14%, and the US dollar being struggling a bit against the Japanese yen and the Chinese yuan in that regard. The encapsulates the financial market. Let's also look at the crypto market and what the digital coins are saying, just as the fiat currencies are saying. The cryptocurrency market, we'll talk about the details. Let's look at the market then and what the price level is for all of these cryptocurrencies. First, we start with Bitcoin, 77,483. a US dollar equaling one Bitcoin, and Bitcoin gaining 721 points this morning at 0.94%, Ether gaining 1.04%, Binance gaining 0.6%, Cardano, Solana, Ripple, and Polkadot all are gaining. A further crypto market then. Let's look at further crypto market and the energy and perspective that comes with it. The likes of Polkadot also gaining 0.98%, Avalanche gaining 1.65%, Polygon gaining 0.34%, Cosmos dropping a negative 1.85%, and DAI gaining slightly, Litecoin falling, Uniswap also gaining, and Algorand gaining. Basically what the crypto market says, that of mixed fortunes. And now to the US future rebound ahead of Nvidia. The US equity futures were higher today, trimming losses from the week as incoming Nvidia results were due to update the state of AI economy that has supported the stock market this year. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq 100 were 0.4% higher, while the Dow gained over 100 points. Nvidia was 1.5% higher pre-market ahead of its result after the closing bell. The chip giant is likely to confirm sharp growth in earnings and orders, but the tone of its guidance is due to impact the whole tech sector in a period where AI spending has carried the US investment last quarter and underpinned productivity growth and infrastructure expenditure in coming years. The rebound in equities took place despite the broad hold in the sell-off for long-term treasuries, pressured by concerns that high energy prices will spread through core sectors of the economy and force the Federal Reserve to raise rates. Also, in earnings front, TJX and Target were both higher, following that result. And now let's look at global company stocks, how the biggest stocks in the world are performing. The global company stocks. Global company stocks looks at J&J, and what a price level is for. First it starts with Oracle, a price level at $181 31 cents per share, downward in the morning, in the afternoon market, not a huge one from a Nigeria's point of view, a Nigeria's time frame. J&J at $230 US dollar per share, gaining 0.49%, P&G gaining 0.07%, ExxonMobil at $160 US dollar 66 cents per share, downward a negative 1.16%, Alphabet a negative 2.32% decline, Goldman Sachs gaining 1.39%, and Caterpillar also falling a negative 0.44%. Let's look at further global company stocks. And now to Apple, at $298 US dollar per share, falling a negative 0.04%. Tesla at $408 US dollar per share, gaining 1.19%. Microsoft falling a negative 0.61%. Amazon, Meta, Nvidia, Visa all gaining, while JP Morgan is downward. And now we'll go on a quick break, and when we're back, world economy continues. We'll be looking at South Africa's inflation rate as it hits over 1.5-year high. It will be a conversation on world economy when we're back from this break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. It's your world economy. My name is Blyden Kim. And now looking at the state of inflation in South Africa, as South Africa inflation hits over 1.5-year high. South Africa's annual inflation rate quickened to 4% in April 2026 from 3.1% in the prior month and slightly above the expected 3.9%. This marks the steepest reading since August 2024, moving further away from the South African Reserve Bank's 3% inflation target. Main upward pressure came from housing and utilities, driven by a recent increase in electricity tariff and transportation, as petrol prices were raised in early April, with a lagged pass-through from higher global oil price linked to the Iran war also contributing. Meanwhile, a food price growth eased further amid strong farm output, while prices are slowed for restaurants and hotels. The core inflation rate, which excludes prices of food, non-alcoholic beverages, fuel, and energy rose to 3.6%, the highest since December 2024, up from March 3.2%. Monthly, the consumer price index rose by 1.1% in April, the most since July 2022, after a 0.6% increase in March. And now we look at the charts indicating South Africa's inflation rate. South Africa's inflation rate, as at May last year, a price level was indicated at 2.8%, began to go up amid electricity concern and mixed fortune and a high cost for oil, petrol, and gasoline in the country amid the wars. A price also going up by July 3.5%, a little slowdown to 3.4% in September, ups and down, and currently going high at 4%, a 1.5-year high, indicating higher costs of commodities, especially the cost of petrol, energy commodities, a tariff for electricity in South Africa, and the South African rand, well, a bit struggling in that. Similarly, a Bank of Indonesia delivers first rate hike since 2024. A Bank Indonesia raised its benchmark interest rate by 50 basis points to 5.25% at its May 2026 policy meeting, delivering a larger than expected increase as market had anticipated a 25 basis point hike to 5%. The move marked the central bank's first rate hike since April 2024, aiming to strengthen the rupiah, curb imported inflation risks, and keep inflation within the government 2.5% plus or minus 1% target range. The rupiah weakened 2.2% from end April to 17,700 rupiah per US dollar on May 19th. Meanwhile, annual inflation eased to 2.42% in April 2026 from 3.48% in March, the lowest since August 2025, and still within the central bank's target range. The decision aligns with pro-stability focus of monetary policy aimed at strengthening Indonesia's external resilience amid global uncertainty. Meanwhile, macroprudential and payment system policies remain geared towards supporting growth, pro-growth. The central bank also raised its overnight deposit facility rate to 4.75% and its lending facility rate to 6%. And lastly, on world economy, UK's inflation rate hits lowest in a year. The annual inflation rate in the UK slowed to 2.8% in April 2026 from 3.3% in March, coming in below market expectations of 3% and marking the lowest reading since March last year. The moderation was mainly driven by a sharp slowdown in housing and household services inflation following the introduction of an energy price cap by the UK's energy regulator on April 1st. Transport costs also rose at a softer pace as a downward effect from vehicle excise duty (VED) partly offset surging motor fuel prices, which climbed 23%, the highest annual increase since September 2022. Inflation also eased for food and non-alcoholic beverages, health, and recreation and culture. Meanwhile, prices rebounded for clothing and furniture and household goods. On a monthly basis, consumer prices increased by 0.7% in April, matching the pace recorded in the previous period. And now let's conclude looking at the chart, as you see, indicating UK's inflation rate. The chart indicating UK's inflation rate began from last year April at 3.5%, by May it dropped to 3.4% before getting to a peak point where it stayed at 3.8% July and went even further until it got to September, still at the same rate of 3.8%, and began to slow down 3.6% and on till November and beginning of the year. It was at 3% at January, February, and March, went up 3.3% and dropping even lower to 2.8%. The lowest rates in terms of inflation, which represent the cost of commodities and the strength of the pound, well, the lowest rates in 1 year. Absolutely fantastic, indicating the strength and improvement of a pound, and we're talking about the cost of commodities dropping in the UK. Well, it's basically what it has to be when it has to do with world economy and the direction that comes with it. And here we draw the curtain in today's edition of World Economy. Thank you for being a part of it. My name is Blyden Ukem. Thank you for watching.